This is the Ames High Annual called The Spirit of 1937. And Dr. Stan Benbrook was a high school senior before he got his veterinary degree. So let's see what he looked like when he was a high school senior. And what there, a handsome lad. I'm going to zoom in. And that year, you got to have a full picture upright and your individual picture as well.
Mm-hmm. And then
Permission to talk to you today and record your voice in your picture.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Please tell me your birth date.
February 27th of 1919.
And where were you born, Mr.
In
Benbrook?
Ames.
Mm-hmm. At home or at a hospital?
In the Mary Greeley Hospital. And that old building doesn't exist anymore. It's all been replaced.
How did it happen that your family was in Ames, Iowa?
Well, my dad was a graduate of vet medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, and he hired on at Oklahoma A&M, which is in Oklahoma State, in the Veterinary Science Division. They were going to start a vet medicine school back in 1916 when he went out there. Well, they got around to it after World War II. But anyway, he was recommended by his old professor of vet pathology to Dean Stang. And Dean Stang hired him and brought him up here in about 1916. And then Dean Stang appointed him the head of vet pathology after he'd been here about a year. Things were pretty primitive in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how we ended up in Ames.
So you, your father knew Dean Stang, and of course there's a road in Ames named
Stang
for
Road.
him. Yes.
He was the dean of vet medicine here when Dad came up in 1916. Very dynamic in the profession.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any stories about Dean Stang?
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about him.
Good.
He was quite a thinker. And I can remember being up in his cabin in northern Minnesota. We used to summer up there. He'd go fishing there. I'd ask him a question, and I would think he hadn't heard me because he didn't acknowledge the question for quite some time. And just about the time I was ready to give up on the question, out would pour a very deliberate, well thought out answer. That was Dean Stang. And he had two daughters, Elizabeth and Jean. Elizabeth was the older one, died some time ago. And I kept track of Jean Stang through the years until 2.5 years ago she finally died of pancreatic cancer. But she was and quite an artist on the faculty at Arizona State and had retired to Mesa, a suburb like Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
So we stayed in touch. And she was a marvelous gal. The poor gal was not much of a looker, so she never married, but she was a marvelous artist. And I have a scholarship in the College of Design in my sister's name. And Jean once asked me if someday she could contribute to that scholarship. By golly, she did when she died.
Good.
She and my sister are very close. If you want to see something funny, go over to that desk over there, and there's a picture of 4 kids. And that's my sister, incidentally. Yeah. I'll tell you about them. On this, that's me at age 5. That's Dean Stang, age 4. My sister, age 3. And Elizabeth, age 7, Stang. This is taken at the Stang cabin in northern Minnesota. Truly a log cabin, and we were sitting on the ice box.
Well,
I get such a kick out of that thing.
let's go back to your childhood then.
Yeah,
And where was your house in Ames?
Baker Street. It's between Donald and Knapp and between Stanton and Lynn Avenues.
It's just a one block.
One block there, right around the corner from the old Louise Crawford school.
And where did you go to grade school?
I went to Welch School.
And that doesn't exist now either.
No. I was very destructive. They tore down that school. They tore down my high school. They ruined Lego Morcino Hall, which Dean Stang, incidentally, had designed.
So let's talk about being a child on Baker Street. What did children do in the early 1920s to have fun?
Golly, one thing that I can remember, a couple of things. My neighbor kid across the street from me, we built a pushmobile. And I remember we never figured out, we had a rope around a broomstick so that we could steer it. But if you turned it right, the thing went left, and vice versa. But we had that thing rigged so at the top of my driveway at Baker Street, we'd give the thing a push, go on down to Lynn Avenue, go on down Lynn to Ash, down around past the Tridell House, clear on down to Lincoln Way. There was just enough slope that a good push would take me all the way for him. And another thing we did, we took each other's bicycles, took the front wheel off of one bike, put it on the back axle of the back ahead. Now the bikes then bent the middle, but we learned how to ride them. But it darn near killed us because you see, there was no rigidity there, the two bikes. But we managed that. I built a lot of model airplanes as a kid, and had another kid on Baker Street, Dean Carey. He married the Roop gal. He was the editor of the Ames Tribune, Roop. And he married her. We used to throw the football around together.
So you went to Welch School.
Yeah.
You had a fun childhood with the young people on Baker Street.
Oh yes, in the surrounding area.
Now, excuse me, go ahead.
Oh, Glenn Cunningham on Storm Street, my age. Dick Kane, Cunningham was the head of the YMCA on the campus. Kane's dad was at Animal Husbandry. John Evans, his dad was in psychology, and those were all kids that we went around with.
Did you have any contact with the so-called downtown kids?
You know, in those days, we didn't know each other. No.
It was almost like two separate villages.
It was. It really was. Now, I'll tell you one more thing about the Louise Crawford School on Stanton. She was my first grade teacher at Welch School. And they named that school after her. And I had a 2-year younger than me sister. That school was designed to go from kindergarten through 4th grade. And the year that school was completed, she was in the 4th grade. So she got a year there.
Louise Crawford gave you a good start.
She did.
Yeah.
I can remember her to this day. A marvelous woman of patience and good humor and all.
So you did meet the downtown kids when you went to high school.
Yeah.
And the high school doesn't exist anymore. The building that was on the...
It's on where the parking lot between City Hall and the First National Bank.
Right.
Yeah.
So how did you get to high school? You didn't walk, did you?
No, they gave us chits, and we used those to take the city bus back and forth.
And would you go to school in the morning? Did you come home for lunch?
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Wow. Do you remember any of your high school teachers?
Oh, yeah. I had a wonderful geometry teacher. Oh, heck.
It'll come to you. We'll pass on. It'll come back to you.
Yeah, it will.
Sure.
And Mr. Harms taught physics. He was good. Ray Donalds, finally became football coach at Iowa State. He was teaching high school biology when I went there at Ames High. And he was also the football coach at Ames High. He was a good biology teacher.
Since you mentioned football, I think you graduated from high school in about 1937.
Correct.
And weren't there good athletic teams at Ames
Oh
High?
my gosh, yes. It was either the 35 or the 36 team. Dr. Bill Blitz was on that team. They went through the whole season. No team scored a point on them until the last game of the season. They played Roosevelt High School, and Roosevelt in the mud beat them 6-0. But they held every other team scoreless. And well, let's see, Clyde Sugart was on that team. Clyde finally became a good Iowa Stater and then played pro ball with the Washington Redskins.
Now, I was thinking there was also an African American player at that time.
Yes, Jack Smith. Now, Jack's mother and father were at the Knoll with the Frileys. He was like the doorman and all, and the chauffeur, and he was Cliff. And his wife, Rena Smith, was the cook and the maid. And they would drive the Frileys up to the Stang cabin sometimes in the summer.
Now, that would have been...
But their son, Jack,
Yes.
was about 35 or 36 grad. I've got some yearbooks there on the shelf.
We'll look at those later.
Yeah, well, that would tell me the year. But Jack, I think, went to Tuskegee, and I think he became one of those famous Tuskegee Airmen.
It was unusual, though, to have an African American person in an Iowa high school.
He and his mother and father, as far as I know, in 1936 or 7, were the only black people at Ames.
Yes.
Wonderful people.
So you mentioned, let's just take a side note for just a second. You mentioned that Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who really functioned kind of as the servants
Yeah.
for the Frileys.
Yeah.
Now, that interests me that there were servants at the Knoll at Iowa State University. Mr. Friley, or President Friley, must have had a Southern tradition.
He came to Iowa State out of Texas A&M and joined the animal husbandry faculty. I think, no, he came directly as president from A&M. He had been animal husbandry at A&M, Texas. And that's, I think, the connection to have the blacks there.
Now, you mentioned that they would summer at the Stang cabin,
Yeah.
and you were in that same area.
Yeah.
Do you remember Jack and his family coming up to the northern Minnesota too?
Yes, Jack, I don't remember him coming up, but Cliff and Rena would drive the Frileys up and tend to them. And Cliff was quite a character. He knew how to fish for catfish. And my dad and he got along very well because Dad taught him how to fish for the other fish. And when they would have faculty parties at Christmas time at the Knoll, Cliff would greet my dad and he'd say, "Come on around the back pretty soon, I got something for you." This was in the days of Prohibition. He'd give him a big old slug of whiskey. He always appreciated my dad because he taught him how to fish. And you'd see Cliff sitting on a diving raft that we had out in the lake fishing for rock bass. And the water was so clear you could see him at the bottom of the lake 12 feet down. And you'd hear him in the evening fishing for the rockfish, and he'd talk to them. "Get away from that hook. I want you. You're too small. Hey, you're the one I want on my hook." And he'd talk to him, and you could hear him all up and down the shoreline. And he, Cliff, liked to fish over on Little Birch Lake, immediately adjacent to 10 Mile, where we were. And he liked to fish for catfish. And he'd say, "You take your pole, and you got your line, and on the end of the line, you got a hook, and then you got a bobble." I mean a bobbin, to keep the line from sinking. And you bait the hook, and you put it in the water, and you tie the rod down on the dock where you're fishing with a couple of rocks. And then you just sit up on the bank, and you smoke your pipe, and you wait. And pretty soon, the bobble's gonna disappear. You don't get excited. You just watch it. Pretty soon, the bobble's gonna disappear again. You still don't get excited. You watch. When the bobble goes down a third time, you know you have a fish. And he'd catch catfish, take them over to the old Stang place, clean them. Rena would soak them overnight in salt water, and they'd eat them for breakfast. Wonderful people.
So when Cliff and Rena Smith went with the Frileys to 10 Mile Lake in Minnesota, did they live with the family?
No, they had a little room for them out in the Stang garage. Can you imagine that? And Cliff had fun living there. In that garage there were always a lot of mice. And he'd sit there with his carbiner, which meant his rifle, and he'd shoot mice. But the rifle was a carbiner. So they were wonderful people. And Jack was very smart, the son, quite an athlete. And I know that his senior class made him class president. They thought that much of him.
So you had, in addition to having fun in the summer at 10 Mile Lake as a high school student, what did high school students do for fun in the early 1930s?
You know, I can't really answer that much, but I don't think they were too sociable. I remember I was pretty much afraid of girls, so I didn't do much there. We weren't too sociable. Oh, Eva White was my geometry teacher. She was marvelous.
I knew you'd think of her name.
Eva White.
Yes.
Oh, she was good.
Well, did high school students ever do pranks?
Yes, the old chemistry class, making the hydrogen sulfide bomb, setting it off in the spring in the ventilation system, and evacuating the school till the stink disappeared. That's about all I can remember for pranks.
Did you have a church that you attended in Ames?
The Episcopal Church. My mother and Dad were both of English origin. In fact, my mother's family came from England. And she was the youngest in the family, but she had brothers and sisters who were born in England. And I guess that's why we ended up with the Episcopal Church.
And were there social activities on the campus that maybe faculty children could take advantage of? Maybe the Y or something?
Yes, there was a YMCA, and in fact, that's right. One night every month or so, they'd, at the YMCA on the campus, high school kids would get to talk to people in various professional fields. And like Dean Stang would come and tell about vet medicine, Dean Kildee would come and talk about animal husbandry and so on. And so that sort of program went on, yes.
Now, you must have decided to attend Iowa State University at some point.
Oh yeah, that was, I think all of us in high school, or almost all of us in my class, probably ended up at Iowa State. Oh, there were a couple of them, like Marguerite Burroughs, Reverend Burroughs, Episcopal. She ended up at Grinnell College. And Margaret Woodrow was older than me. Her dad was head of physics. She went to Drake. But other than that, we all went to Iowa State.
So where did you live when you went to Iowa State University?
I lived at home. And then World War II came along. And I had a low draft number. And they had what they called a procurement and assignment service to exempt professional students. But they hadn't gotten it set up yet. So I went down and enlisted in the Navy. And the next day, I know my dad said they called up and wanted to know where I was for the Army. But I'd already enlisted in the Navy. So I ended up Navy Hospital Corpsman out in the Pacific.
Well, let's come back to Ames for just a second. For some reason, I have a note here that said that you knew Ike Hayes, ISU football player? Yes, well, tell me about that.
Well, Ike was a brother of Woody Hayes, the famous Ohio State coach.
But Ike Hayes must have been playing football at Iowa State.
Ike weighed about 150 or 160, but hard as nails. He was a vet medicine student and played football. He was all conference. He was that good. But Ike was trying to work his way through school, had his dog, and study, and it was just almost more than he could handle.
So he got tired, it sounds like.
Yeah,
It was tough for him.
he'd go to sleep in class. And years later, I saw Ike at an Iowa Veterinary Medical Association meeting in Des Moines. And we got talking, Ike and myself, and he said, you know, your dad did me a great favor. And I said, what was that, Ike? And he said, he flunked me in parasitology. And I said, that was a favor? He said, yes. It woke me up to the fact that I was not getting the education that I needed.
But it sounds like he ended up okay as a vet.
Oh, yeah. He ended up in equine horse practice up near Waterloo. Did very well.
Speaking of vets, kind of at this roughly the same time, Dr. Margaret Sloss.
Dr. Sloss, my dad hired her as a technician in about 1924 in vet pathology. Through the years, many years, she'd take a course at a time until she finally was the first female grad in vet medicine at Iowa State. When she got her DVM, she stayed on, and Dad put her in charge of clinical pathology. So that was her job, I guess, until she retired.
Do you have any personal memories of Dr. Sloss?
Oh gosh, yes. She was she loved to chew and pop gum. I could never pop chewing gum like she could. She'd be working as a technician, making slides, tissue slides, chewing gum and popping it. And she was very good. She had a nephew that lived in Bloomfield, Iowa. And he'd come to visit, and she'd give us each a quarter so we could go to the movie on Saturday and get some popcorn to go with it.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
A quarter would get you into the movie,
Oh,
and
yeah.
popcorn too.
Two of us, yeah. Good gosh.
Yes.
But he was a nice kid. I'm trying to remember his name now. But he tried to teach me how to play chess when he was here. Not too successfully.
So Dr. Margaret Sloss worked with tissues, and somewhere along the line, I seem to think that she knew about your tonsils.
Oh, yeah. I had my tonsils removed about 1925, I think. And I can remember the pain, of course, that goes with getting those tonsils nipped out. And evidently Dr. Ben Budge, the physician, put those tonsils in some formalin, preserved them. And about a year later, I'm over at the vet medicine building, and Margaret says, "Here, I want to show you your tonsils." And I said, "No." I almost threw a fit. I didn't want to see those tonsils.
Now, the Sloss family was connected to Iowa State in another way.
Tom Sloss, Margaret's father, was the superintendent of buildings and grounds on the campus, hence the old Sloss house right next to, I call it Egg Hall, what is it now?
Curtis.
Curtis Hall. That was a Sloss house because he had to live on campus. And he was an old Scotsman, he and his wife. Wonderful people. I can remember some good meals in that Sloss house that Mrs. Sloss made up. And Margaret Sloss, for a hobby, was good at chip carving wood. See that? She taught me how to do that, and then I made up my own design. Yeah, I just made up my own designs, and she taught me how to get started on that sort of
That's
thing.
beautiful.
Yeah,
I'm gonna,
that's just one of the
I'm just
boxes
gonna
that
hold
I
that
made.
up so I could see. Great, thank you.
But that was, Margaret Sloss got me started on that.
Now, how did Mr. Sloss feel about smoking?
At one time, he had signs put over office doors all over the campus. No smoking. Of course, Margaret being an employee under Dad, Dad was in his office one day, smoking a cigar, probably correcting some papers or something, and Tom walked by, and with his Scottish accent, he said, "Don't you know? Can't you read signs, Doctor?" And Dad says, "Come on in, Tom," and they sat down and got to chatting. And pretty soon Dad passed his cigar box over to Tom. He says, "Have a cigar, Tom." Tom took a cigar, put it in his jacket pocket, and he says, "You don't mind if I smoke it later, do you?"
Now, who had the policy to not have smoking on campus?
Well, when Dad first came, old President Stanton was death on smoking. I can't remember what year Stanton.
Actually, that was pretty forward thinking.
I think it was, yeah.
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 So, do you have any stories about President Stanton?
Well, he was about as big around as he was tall. A little roly-poly guy. And in the days when he was president, for some reason, they'd maybe go downtown Ames to the theater for a movie or something. In those days, the co-eds all had dresses and corsets and bonnets and frilly sleeves where they would keep their handkerchiefs. One night coming back from downtown, people on the little trolley were trying to keep from laughing because one of these co-eds dropped her handkerchief on his lap. He was on the same trolley. Well, he was so big around he couldn't quite see too well what that was, but he thought it was these shirt tails sticking out, and they had button pants in those days. Everybody on the trolley died trying to keep a straight face while he gradually shoved that handkerchief underneath his pants.
That would be a hard thing to explain when you got home.
I can imagine when bedtime came along, there might have been some explaining to do.
In the Iowa State Cemetery, there is a fellow who is a night watchman at Iowa State University who's reportedly buried with his dog.
Yep,
Who is that
Newt
person?
Hegland.
Newt Hegland.
He was an old Scandinavian, and he was the night watchman.
Mm-hmm.
He'd walk all over the campus. Mm-hmm. I can remember one time in the winter time, I must have been about 10 years old. Yeah, around 1929. Newt came in to the vet medicine building at night. Dad and I had set up cots in one of the classrooms because my mother was staying home taking care of my sister with scarlet fever.
Oh, that would have been you. That was contagious, and you needed to be
Oh, yeah.
separated from
Yeah.
her. Yes. Mm-hmm.
That was a month-long quarantine. Nowadays, a shot of penicillin in the behind takes care of it.
Now, just for clarification, we're talking about the quad, what we call the vet
old-
quad.
Which
yes.
is today Lego Morsita Hall,
Right.
which Dean Stang originally had designed.
Aha. Okay.
And that's the same place where later on Christian Peterson did most of his sculpture work.
So to flip back to maybe 1928 or so, it's at night. You and your dad are in cots in the quad building.
And maybe it would be snowing or something cold, bitter cold, wind blowing, and Newt would come in with his Scandinavian accent, stomping the snow off his boots, and he'd say, "Fine night, doctor." That was his usual greeting. And they'd chat for a little while, and then he'd have to get on with these rounds. He had a big old time clock that he carried around his neck. Something about punching in at the various buildings around campus.
Well, I can see how you became a vet. You had your dad as an example.
Margaret Sloss.
Margaret Sloss and Dean Stang you had association with. So I think your future was carved out for you.
Yeah, I think it really was.
Uh-huh.
The first year I applied, I didn't get in. I had to apply again. And then the damn war came along, World War II.
Mm-hmm. That kind of threw a wrench in it, so to speak. Yeah.
So
what were the meals like at when you were on campus? Now, I assume you took meals at home instead of at a dormitory or such.
yes, I did eat at home.
You ate at home, yes.
But I remember that month when we were quarantined out of the house. Dad would take me over to the old YMCA. And in the basement there, they had a cafeteria with very good food and an old Victrola. And I could remember that Victrola playing "It's 3 o'clock in the morning" at Waltz. Old Waltz. They'd play that over and over and over again. And that was just before the Memorial Union was finished. And so about the next year, the union was open, and well, okay, the union opened in 28. So it was that winter of 27, 28 then. So I was, what, 9 years old. Yeah.
You're real close. Your math is good, and you're
But my hips, not so good.
well. I'm glad that your stories are fresh and that your memories of that time are
Yeah.
good. So, in addition to you walked to class, you carried your books to class at
Yeah.
Iowa State.
Yeah.
Did you have any places to gather on the campus that you remember, or was the Y kind of the principal gathering spot?
I never congregated with anybody on the campus. If I was on the campus, I was over at vet medicine.
Right. It was a demanding curriculum,
Yeah,
and so
but I can remember starting vet medicine, walking across the campus into a north wind in January at about 20 below. They never canceled classes in those days, but I'd have to duck in to the Union, and then I'd duck into Curtis Hall for a few minutes to get warmed up, and the old Botany Hall, which is now
Cat Hall.
Cat Hall, getting warm, heading over toward vet medicine.
Are there
Walking
any?
into that wind in the morning.
Yes, because you're on Baker Street, which was the
Yeah.
south side of the campus. That
Yeah.
was a long walk. That was
Yeah.
a hike.
Yeah.
That was a good distance to go.
But you know, in the nice weather, that was a delightful walk because you could walk to class and Irish Raider would be playing the campanile. And he was a great artist on the carillon.
Yes. Are there some other Iowa State stories you'd like to tell me that I haven't thought to ask you, or fun times of being there and the?
Yeah, well, Iowa State's always been very progressive in various scientific fields. Like our neighbor next door to us, Woodrow, was the head of physics. He had been a Fulbright scholar in England and very pleasant guy, raised dahlias, and quite a gardener. Yeah.
I meant to ask you, what was tuition when you were going to school?
After the war, of course, I had the GI Bill, but you were on the quarter system. You won't believe this. The tuition was $47.88
You remember it to the penny.
to the penny. How could you forget it?
That's true.
Yeah.
So you then had your own veterinary career outside of Ames. You were in
Yeah.
the service.
Yeah. And then I had not bothered to get out of the Navy. Along comes the Korean War. The Navy said, come to Korea. And I said, heck no. And the Navy finally said, if you can get yourself a commission in the Army Veterinary Corps and will go on active duty, we will release you. So that's where my vet medicine military career began. But I had good research assignments, except that old Russell McNellis, General McNellis, an Iowa State grad incidentally, veterinarian, headed the vet corps, and regardless of what field of action we were in, we all had to have a year in Vietnam. So that year I was over there working with the health of the scout and the sentry dogs.
We forget that animals played a huge part
Yeah.
in some wars.
Yeah,
Now with electronics and things bombing out of the sky and radars and
Yeah.
and all this sort of thing, everything's electronic. But horses were critical.
oh yeah, yeah. and dogs now
dogs.
to this day. But the old horses disappeared right after World War II.
Right.
In fact, I remember pretty awful. They farmed out some of the old ROTC horses right after the war at Iowa State. They shot a bunch of them because they couldn't take care of them. And they phased the horses out right after the war.
Yeah.
I can remember one of the Lynn brothers. There were 4 Lynn brothers that wrestled at Iowa State, and they were all vet medicine students. And Frank Lynn was the oldest. He was the oldest. Frank finished vet medicine and was dragged into the war. And I can remember him telling one story about being on the China-Burma, India path there with pack animals, mules, and mountainsides. And one time a mule fell off a cliff. I don't know how many feet down he was. Had his packs on his back. They finally got down to the mule. Well, the doggone mule was standing there waiting for him. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
A couple 100 feet.
Wow. Well, just in conclusion, Ames must have held a lot of good memories for you, because after a distinguished career really all over the world in the armed services, you came back.
Yeah. My wife was getting pretty fuzzy. I knew that Alzheimer's was coming on. And so I said to myself, Jane, we're going home. So we came back to Green Hills here, and that was the best move I ever could have made.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing some stories with me today. I know you were not feeling as comfortable maybe as you have at some time, but I hope it was fun.
It's been fun, Teresa. I don't know what you're going to do with that information, but it's been fun talking with you.
Thank you so much.
There's